Nietzsche's philosophy often points to an idea deeper than the mere use of words or arguments, the embodiment of one's inner strength. The concept of presence, in his worldview, is not just physical but metaphysical, a radiating force that demonstrates one's mastery over themselves and the world around them. To master the art of presence means to embody a form of being where speech becomes almost unnecessary, because the very manner in which a person exists already communicates volumes. Nietzsche saw words as secondary tools. Real strength, he believed, exists in what is lived, not in what is said. Presence begins with self-overcoming, one of Nietzsche's most persistent themes. To carry oneself with true presence, a person must first have undergone the internal battles that forge a resilient soul. This kind of internal discipline is invisible to the casual eye, but palpable to anyone who stands in proximity. It is not brashness or arrogance. Rather, it is a calm, grounded certainty that needs no external validation. It comes from a deep acceptance of one's instincts, drives, and ambitions, not in their raw form, but in a refined, self-directed manner. Nietzsche would call this the triumph of the higher self over the chaotic, base instincts of the herd mentality. Confidence, in Nietzsche's sense, is not the outward expression of bravado, but an inner truth that resonates outwardly. It is a form of authenticity that cannot be faked because it is tied to the individual's unique path. What he referred to as the creation of one's own values. A person with real presence has crafted their own meaning and carries it effortlessly. Their walk, their stillness, even their silence, speak of battles fought and won, of a life lived with intentionality rather than drifting along the currents of convention. This kind of calm, confident presence unsettles others, because it challenges the social norms they unconsciously obey. Most people are deeply intertwined with the approval of others. They are subtly enslaved by the gaze and judgments of society. A person who is self-contained, who acts from their own center rather than responding to external stimuli, is therefore a threat to the social order. Without saying a word, they expose the insecurity and dependency in others. Nietzsche admired such figures because they live the Dionysian principle, a life of overflowing strength that does not seek to be understood, explained, or justified. Moreover, Nietzsche's idea of presence is inherently tied to the concept of Amor, Fati, the love of one's fate. A person who embraces everything about their existence, the triumphs, the failures, the pain and the joy, becomes unshakable. They no longer resist life, but affirm it entirely. Such affirmation manifests physically and emotionally, creating a being who stands before the world as an undeniable force. There is no need to speak loudly or defend oneself aggressively. Existence itself becomes the argument. Mastering presence is also an act of aesthetic living, which Nietzsche championed as the highest form of existence. To live aesthetically is not to live superficially, but to treat one's life as a work of art. Presence then becomes the visible aura of a carefully sculpted soul. Like a great work of art, it needs no verbal explanation. It impresses, disturbs, and fascinates through mere being. Others are drawn to it, not necessarily because they understand it, but because they feel its undeniable authenticity. Nietzsche's disdain for the purely rational man, the one who relies solely on intellect and verbal arguments, further illuminates why presence matters more than speech. Rationality is just one layer of human existence, often used to mask deeper, instinctual drives. Presence cuts through this facade. It communicates directly to the instincts of others, bypassing their rational defenses. In the presence of someone who has mastered themselves, others feel exposed, as if a deeper, unspoken truth is being acknowledged. To master presence also demands solitude, something Nietzsche relentlessly advocated. Solitude, not loneliness, is the space where one confronts oneself without distraction. It is where the shallow need for social approval is burned away, and the individual is left to forge their essence in the fires of self-examination. Presence is born in these lonely battles. It is not taught in schools or learned in conversations. It is earned through an existential confrontation with life itself. There is a certain cruelty in such presence, which Nietzsche would not deny. It reflects a will to power, but not over others in a petty sense. It is power over oneself, over chaos, over the nihilism that threatens to consume the spirit in a meaningless world. In mastering themselves, such individuals inadvertently dominate others, not by force, but by making them feel their own lack. Without a word, they impose a re-evaluation of values in everyone they encounter. In the end, mastering the art of presence is not a tactic, but a transformation. It requires the creation of a new self, one that transcends the reactive, herd-driven nature of ordinary existence. It is an act of rebellion against the mediocrity and conformity Nietzsche despised. A person who embodies this art does not merely participate in life, they command it. Their silence speaks louder than the loudest rhetoric. Their stillness weighs heavier than 1,000 actions. Thus, for Nietzsche, to outsmart anyone without saying a word is not a matter of clever manipulation. It is a deeper, existential triumph. It is the victory of being over appearance, of strength over performance, of inner mastery over outer noise. It is the realization of the highest form of life, one that creates its own meaning and radiates its own power, needing neither explanation nor permission. Nietzsche's philosophy often revolves around penetrating beyond the surface of appearances, aiming to uncover the underlying forces that govern human behavior. To observe ruthlessly is not merely to watch, but to perceive with an almost surgical precision, cutting through pretensions, illusions, and masks. Nietzsche regarded life as a battlefield of wills and instincts, rather than a realm of transparent rationality. Thus, to outsmart others, one must begin by understanding them not as they present themselves, but as they truly are beneath their socially acceptable facades. In Nietzsche's view, human beings are primarily driven by unconscious forces rather than conscious decisions. These forces, desires, fears, ambitions, insecurities, shape their actions and attitudes. A person skilled in observation recognizes that words are often a smokescreen, emotions are frequently disguises, and social behavior is typically a form of self-preservation. Nietzschean observation does not take statements at face value. Instead, it interprets, deciphers, and reads between the lines, always asking what hidden need or weakness a particular behavior serves. Observing ruthlessly involves cultivating a form of intellectual suspicion. Nietzsche famously described himself as a philosopher of suspicion, someone who looked behind noble-sounding ideals to find baser motives like the will to power, fear of suffering, or the desire for control. For example, he often critiqued morality itself as a covert strategy of the weak to constrain the strong. Applied to interpersonal relations, this mindset entails assuming that many actions are strategic rather than genuine, and that understanding people requires recognizing the games they play to achieve their goals. Patterns are especially important in Nietzschean observation. Human beings, despite believing themselves to be spontaneous and unique, often fall into predictable patterns dictated by their psychological structures and social conditioning. Observing ruthlessly means identifying these patterns without sentimentality. When someone constantly seeks validation, sabotages others subtly, or masks resentment with politeness, the keen observer sees through it, understanding the behavior as part of a larger, often unconscious, pattern of self-protection or domination. Nietzsche also emphasized that true observation requires emotional detachment. Sentimental observers are blind to the more brutal aspects of human nature, because they want to believe in goodness or fairness. To observe ruthlessly is to accept the darker realities without flinching. It is to recognize that envy, greed, vanity, and fear are often the real drivers of action, even among those who appear virtuous. By stripping away comforting illusions, the ruthless observer gains a strategic advantage. They see reality as it is, not as it is wished to be. Another critical aspect of Nietzschean observation is the recognition of self-deception. People are not only deceptive toward others, they are even more deceptive toward themselves. Many individuals construct narratives about themselves that make their existence seem noble, meaningful, or justified. They believe these narratives so deeply that they act them out without conscious awareness. The ruthless observer, however, watches for inconsistencies between professed values and actual behavior, detecting the cracks where self-deception reveals itself. In doing so, they achieve a deeper understanding of others than those individuals have of themselves. Nietzsche believed that understanding hidden motives also means understanding suffering. Most defensive behaviors are rooted in pain or fear. Ruthless observation does not mean cruelty. It means seeing that behind arrogance often lies deep insecurity, Behind controlling behavior lies a profound fear of chaos, and behind cynicism lies wounded idealism. Recognizing these hidden sufferings allows the observer to predict behavior, manipulate outcomes if needed, or simply remain unshaken by the emotional performances of others. The philosopher also insisted that observation must be turned inward, as rigorously as outward. To truly understand others' hidden motives, one must first recognize them in oneself. Without self-knowledge, observation becomes clouded by projection and bias. Nietzsche's concept of perspectivism teaches that all observation is influenced by the observer's standpoint. Thus, the ruthless observer must constantly question their own motives, assumptions, and reactions to approach a clearer vision of others. Nietzsche saw the world as a place of endless interpretation rather than fixed truths. Every behavior, every word, every gesture carries multiple potential meanings, depending on the context and the observer's insight. The ruthless observer is aware that meanings are not given, but must be constructed carefully. They do not leap to conclusions, but gather layers of evidence, cross-referencing behavior over time to discern underlying drives. Nietzsche's admiration for artists, particularly tragedians like Sophocles, reveals another dimension of ruthless observation, the aesthetic sense. Great artists, in his view, are not merely creators of beauty, but master observers of human nature. They capture the subtle truths about suffering, ambition, and failure, without moralizing. Similarly, the person who observes ruthlessly learns to see people as complex, tragic figures, shaped by forces beyond their control yet struggling to assert their will nonetheless. In social interactions, the benefit of ruthless observation is immense. It allows one to anticipate reactions, avoid traps, and exploit opportunities without necessarily revealing one's own intentions. It cultivates a strategic advantage rooted not in force or persuasion but in superior understanding. Nietzsche would argue that those who observe better dominate without needing to coerce or flatter. They move through social arenas like chess masters, seeing moves and counter-moves before others are even aware a game is being played. However, Nietzsche's emphasis on observation is not meant to foster cynicism for its own sake. Instead, it is a path toward freedom. By seeing through illusions, one is no longer bound by them. By understanding the true motives of others, one can act freely, rather than being manipulated by appeals to sentiment, guilt, or fear. Ruthless observation thus serves the broader Nietzschean goal, the liberation of the individual spirit from the collective delusions of society. In the final analysis, Nietzsche's call for ruthless observation is a call to live more consciously. It demands the courage to look at human nature without the filters of morality, tradition, or comforting lies. It challenges the individual to sharpen their perception until they see not just what is said and done, but why it is said and done. Through this clarity, one steps closer to the Übermensch, the higher being who creates their own values and navigates life not through naive hope, but through profound, merciless understanding. In Nietzsche's view, strength is not simply the ability to act, but the ability to withhold action until the right moment. Control over one's reactions is a mark of deep inner power, a sign that the individual is governed by their own will, rather than by external forces. When confronted with provocation, criticism, or even praise, the average person reacts impulsively, revealing their emotional state and ceding control of the interaction. The one who masters their reactions, by contrast, maintains sovereignty over themselves and, by extension, gains an unspoken dominance over others. Reacting immediately is often a symptom of inner weakness. It indicates that the individual is ruled by instinct, wounded pride, or uncontrolled emotion. Nietzsche understood that true power lies in the ability to create a pause between stimulus and response. Within that pause is freedom, the freedom to choose whether to respond, how to respond, and whether responding at all is even necessary. This control denies the aggressor the satisfaction of seeing their influence succeed. It signals a strength that is unnerving to those who rely on manipulation, emotional pressure, or intimidation. Silence is one of the most powerful forms of reaction control. When attacked or challenged, the temptation is strong to defend oneself, to explain, or to retaliate. But silence projects an impenetrable calm, suggesting either indifference to the attack or a level of superiority that renders the attack meaningless. Nietzsche valued this ability to remain silent, not out of fear but out of deliberate choice. In remaining silent, a person refuses to grant the attacker legitimacy. They refuse to validate the aggressor's need for recognition or engagement. Silence becomes a fortress, an assertion of strength without needing to lift a finger. A smirk, too, is a subtle but devastating tool. It suggests not rage, not hurt, but amusement, an acknowledgement that the attack is not serious enough to merit a full response. The smirk signals that the provocateur has failed to inflict harm, failed to unbalance the opponent. It diminishes the aggressor's status while elevating the smirker's position. Nietzsche understood that laughter, especially the quiet internal laughter of the strong, is a sign that one has transcended petty conflicts and refuses to be pulled down into them. Steady eye contact is another potent form of reaction control. Eyes often reveal fear, insecurity, or anger. Breaking eye contact at the wrong moment can communicate submission or weakness. Maintaining steady, unflinching eye contact without hostility signals supreme confidence. It says, without words, that one is unafraid, unimpressed, and unmoved. In a Nietzschean framework, where strength and dominance are not always exercised through overt force but through subtle displays of will, steady eye contact becomes a tool of quiet domination. Controlling reactions also means managing internal states. It is not enough to appear calm. One must actually cultivate calmness. Nietzsche recognized that mastery of the self was more profound than mastery over others. If one is seething inside but appears composed on the outside, they are still enslaved by their passions. The ideal is to achieve an inner serenity that external provocations cannot disturb. This serenity does not come naturally. It must be trained through discipline, reflection, and the cultivation of an unshakable sense of self. To control reactions is also to resist the urge to seek validation. Many human interactions are attempts to win approval, sympathy, or recognition. The Nietzschean individual, however, understands that needing validation from others is a form of weakness. By refusing to react in ways that seek external approval, such as defensive explanations, apologies made for the sake of acceptance, or boasting, the individual asserts their independence from the herd. They live by their own standards, not by the shifting judgments of others. Nietzsche emphasized that reaction control is strategic. In some cases, a calculated response may serve one's interests. However, the key is that such a response is chosen, not compelled. The difference is crucial. Compelled reactions are predictable and can be manipulated by others. Chosen reactions keep others guessing, preserving one's freedom and unpredictability. In social and political life, those who are difficult to read and slow to anger are often the most formidable opponents. They cannot be baited, and their silence or delayed response creates a psychological pressure that words cannot match. Another aspect of reaction control is the understanding of timing. Nietzsche appreciated the tactical value of patience. Often, the most devastating response is not immediate, but delayed. By waiting, by allowing events to unfold, the individual can respond at a time of their own choosing, when the advantage is greatest. This refusal to be rushed is another sign of true strength. The world is full of impulsive actors who sabotage themselves by reacting too quickly. The Nietzschean figure remains deliberate, measuring the situation before acting in a way that is both decisive and final. Reaction control also protects one's energy. Constantly reacting to every slight, every provocation, every shift in public opinion is exhausting. Nietzsche viewed life as a process of the intensification of one's own powers. Wasting energy on pointless reactions depletes these powers. By maintaining composure and choosing when to engage, the individual conserves their inner resources for truly significant battles. They rise above the noise of daily life, refusing to be ensnared by the endless demands for attention and outrage. Moreover, controlling reactions serves the cultivation of individuality. In a society where group emotions often sweep people into waves of collective hysteria, the one who remains detached stands apart. Nietzsche admired those rare individuals who did not lose themselves in the crowd, who maintained their personal rhythm and perspective, even when surrounded by mass opinion. Reaction control thus becomes an expression of one's commitment to their own values, a rejection of the conformist pressures that seek to erode individuality. Ultimately, Nietzsche's teaching on reaction control is a call to live from the inside out, rather than from the outside in. It demands a recentering of power within oneself, making one's own judgment, values, and timing the guiding forces of life. It demands the cultivation of a kind of spiritual aristocracy, in which dictate, self-possession, and selective engagement become the markers of true superiority. In mastering one's reactions, one moves closer to the ideal of the Übermensch, the self-overcoming individual who does not merely react to the world but shapes it according to their will. Control over reactions is thus not a mere tactic for winning arguments or unsettling opponents. It is a fundamental aspect of living a powerful, self-directed life. Nietzsche understood that to rule others one must first rule oneself, and that the greatest form of rule is often silent, invisible, and expressed in the smallest but most telling moments. The will to power is one of Nietzsche's central and most profound concepts. It represents the fundamental driving force within every living being, not merely a desire to survive, but a deeper, more dynamic impulse to assert, expand, and express one's strength. For Nietzsche, life itself is an expression of will, and the highest form of life is characterized by the mastery and enhancement of one's own power. Embodying the will to power means becoming a person who draws strength from within, who does not beg for validation, and who moves through the world with silent authority and undeniable presence. To embody the will to power is to live from a center of personal strength, rather than from dependence on external approval. Most people are enslaved by the opinions and judgments of others, seeking praise, recognition, and acceptance to affirm their worth. Nietzsche saw this as a sign of weakness, a symptom of spiritual poverty. True power, he argued, comes from affirming oneself independently of outside validation. The individual who embodies the will to power does not ask, "What do others think of me?" but rather, "What do I will into existence by my own strength?" This silent independence unsettles those who rely on social approval, because it represents a kind of freedom that they cannot control or understand. Radiating self-mastery does not mean boasting or overt displays of power. It is a quiet, persistent emanation of strength. Nietzsche prized the idea of becoming who one is, not in the sense of conforming to an external ideal, but by forging oneself into a unique and powerful being through conscious self-overcoming. Self-mastery involves the relentless discipline of one's instincts, emotions, and desires, shaping them according to one's own values rather than those inherited from society or tradition. It requires a kind of internal sovereignty, where the individual commands themselves fully and thus commands a subtle but profound influence over the world around them. In a world full of people desperate to be seen and heard, silent self-mastery is disarming. It suggests an inner wealth that needs no external confirmation. It is the quiet confidence of someone who knows their own value and does not feel compelled to advertise it. This kind of presence draws attention without seeking it. It invites respect without demanding it. It unnerves manipulators and disarms critics, because it offers no obvious weakness to exploit. Nietzsche understood that the most potent forms of power are often invisible, operating beneath the surface through sheer force of character. Those who embody the will to power are not reactive. They are proactive in shaping their lives according to their own vision. They do not define themselves by what they are against, but by what they affirm. Their energy is not spent defending themselves against attacks or criticisms, but in building, creating, and asserting their presence through action and being. This mode of existence contrasts sharply with those who are caught in cycles of resentment and victimhood, who define themselves in opposition to others, rather than by their own inner compass. Nietzsche rejected the notion that morality, as conventionally understood, should govern the powerful individual. Instead, he advocated for a revaluation of all values, where strength, creativity, and life affirmation replaced guilt, obedience, and self-denial. To embody the will to power is to live beyond conventional good and evil, to operate according to a personal ethos grounded in growth, vitality, and the enhancement of life. It requires courage, for it means standing apart from the herd, risking misunderstanding and enduring isolation in pursuit of a greater self. The individual who lives by the will to power does not seek to dominate others through force or coercion. True power is not about subjugating others, but about fully realizing one's own potential. Domination of others is often a sign of inner insecurity, a need to compensate for internal weakness. The genuine expression of the will to power is the overflowing of one's strength in ways that inspire, challenge, and elevate existence itself. It is the creation of values, the shaping of meaning, the assertion of one's own vision of life. Silently embodying this principle makes one formidable, while others are caught in petty struggles for recognition, approval, and status. The individual rooted in their own power moves differently. They are driven not by the fear of falling behind, but by the joy of becoming more. Their focus is internal. Am I stronger today than yesterday? Am I more complete, more capable, more self-possessed? This inner orientation shields them from the turbulence of external events and the fickle judgments of the crowd. Nietzsche's will to power is not static. It demands continual growth, continual overcoming of limitations. It is not enough to achieve a certain level of strength and then rest. True life demands perpetual striving, a constant pushing beyond the self. The one who embodies this spirit is never complacent. They are always creating themselves anew, always transforming weakness into strength, always seeking higher forms of existence. In this way, life becomes an art, and the individual becomes the artist of themselves. Living according to the will to power also means accepting suffering and struggle as necessary components of growth. Nietzsche was clear that hardship, difficulty, and even failure are not to be avoided, but embraced as part of the process of becoming stronger. The individual who embodies the will to power does not shrink from challenges, but sees them as opportunities to test and refine their strength. They do not seek comfort, but greatness, and greatness always comes at a cost. By silently radiating self-mastery, by refusing to live for the approval of others, and by continually striving to overcome oneself, the Nietzschean individual moves through the world as a force unto themselves. They create new possibilities simply by existing as they do. They outmaneuver those who live by manipulation or dependence because they do not operate within the same rules. Their presence alone is a reminder that true power is not given but seized from within, and that the highest life is one of self-overcoming, self-creation, and the silent, inexorable assertion of the will to power.